Welcome back to another episode of the Planify Podcast. I'm Casey Cease, and I'm really excited to have my good friend Pete Wachowski on here. Pete is going to introduce himself in just a moment, but we're going to talk about his journey to becoming an attorney, to narrowing down into personal injury, some of the lessons he's learned along the way, how to value yourself and your time and your worth, regardless of the business you're in, how to really talk about money with clients and find ways where everyone can win. There's a lot of gold in this, and so I'm really excited to introduce you to my friend Pete Wachowski. So let's get on with the show. Hey, Peter, thanks so much for joining me today on the Planify Podcast. Why don't you start out and just share a little bit of your background, who you are, what you do. You might be known in the Chicagoland and surrounding areas as a great attorney and personal injury lawyer, but as I've gotten to know you, we've become friends. You're actually a great businessman. And so why don't you give us a little bit of your background and let's talk a little bit about business and go from there.
So I'm Pete Wachowski. I'm an attorney. I represent injured people and their families here in the Chicagoland area. I can say that I've phased out from general practice over the years, and as I've gotten older, I've kind of fine-tuned to the personal injury arena. So that's my basic. That's what I do right now today, and I run this business here. I'm a partner with a guy named George, and our law firm is Bellison Wachowski, and we're the first suburb outside of the city of Chicago. The name of it is Park Ridge, Illinois, and that's what I do.
That's awesome, man. So law, I mean, I know a bit of your story. Why don't you share a little of your background, how you ended up in law? Because that wasn't your trajectory when you first started in college. So how did you end up, becoming a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I started out doing is in college. I'm first generation American, and so in my head, I had put these goals in my head of I needed something that was going to give me what's considered, status or stature. Um, and I wanted something that would help me make a good living. And I want to get into that story. Why? I'll just give a little background. My parents got divorced. My mom was she was an entrepreneur. I mean, she wasn't always an entrepreneur, but she did really, really well, the last several years of her life. And I kind of think that kind of came over to me, those genes, the entrepreneurial genes. Um, and so, the thing that really molded me was the hardest thing that I had ever been through in my life was my parents' divorce. And so in my head, I made this equation. I said, not enough money equals divorce, because my parents always argued about money. And so I said to myself, that can't be me. And so I set these goals in my head of what I wanted to be. My original goal was, just like many attorneys, is I was a failed pre-med. I started out saying I want to be a doctor because that'll give me the things that I'm looking for. Those two things, so that I succeed at my marriage and my family life. And so I started out pre-med here in Chicago at Loyola University, and I was doing really well until organic chemistry. And organic chemistry gave me a swift kick in the rear, and so that was failure number one. I didn't fail the class, but I struggled with it. I think to get a D or whatever I got in there, I had to work really hard, and I was a grinder to begin with. So this just the wheels, they grinded to a halt, had to come to a stop. And around the same time, and it's funny how kind of God intervenes and kind of guides you along. My grandma was in the hospital. I went to go visit her, and I looked around. I'm like, wait a second, I don't think this is for me. So that choice was made for me a couple different ways. The one way was I saw her suffering in the hospital, and I realized this is not for me. The blood and all the different things you have to do, not for me. And then obviously, I'll just be honest, I wasn't smart enough. I couldn't handle organic chemistry, and so I was a psych major at that point. I became a psych major, and I excelled at that. I did real well. And then that road came to an end. At that time, I didn't realize that you could make a living as a psychologist. So I figured, oh boy, what am I going to do now? And then a decision was the decision was to go to law school because that was an avenue to give me those things that I looked for. Had no idea if it was going to work for me, and it worked. And it's funny because I've done um, what are they called? Myers Briggs, and I've done a Colby A assessment. And when you analyze them, it says you'd make a good lawyer. And sure enough, I got lucky. I got really lucky, man, because I got into something not knowing if I was going to be good at it, and it turns out that I found a home, and that's where I was meant to be. Long answer.
Did you know any attorneys at the time? Like, know anyone that you're like, oh, I could do what they're doing, or see it on TV, or like, was it just like, hey, I want to do something that's prestigious, and the organic chem showed me that maybe this path isn't it, and so I hear lawyers do well, and so I'm going to go be a lawyer. Was that basically how it broke down?
Casey. So I have to tell you, I am the very first person in my entire family to finish high school. Okay. So all my aunts and uncles, no one finished high school.
Mm.
And so I was the very, very first one. And then college was just like, whoa, okay, college boy, you're going to college? Oh, okay. And then I decided to go to law school. So anyway, so no,
So you go through law school.
I had no role models. I had no one to look up to that was telling me, hey, you know what? You should go to law school.
Well, my dad's comes from a family. He has four brothers. All of them went to law school.
Mm,
Four of them ended up practicing law. His dad was a lawyer, right? So for me, from the time I could speak, that was my trajectory.
hmm
And then I realized, like, watching how stressful it can be. My dad, being a Vietnam vet, and the way he's wired, he like eats stress for breakfast and just charges
hmm
him up, and he's ready to go. He's a litigator. And as I was growing up, I was like, I could probably be good at that, but I have no interest. And so, as a psych major myself, I realized, okay, I need to be a greeter at Walmart with a psych degree, right? Go to graduate school, and I ended up going to seminary instead, but had always been entrepreneurial and
hmm
all that. And so, I'm grateful for my background as well. But if you'd asked me when I was a kid, would I ever go to seminary? The last things I wanted to do was be a preacher or a teacher, because
hmm
they're often not really valued in the recipient's eyes at times. And it's been a joy doing that. And having been an entrepreneur and a pastoral background, it really helps me serve people well. And watching you talk about your clients and getting to work with you and see how well you're thoughtful about your clients and everything else. But you didn't start out as a personal injury lawyer only, right? You were really more in general practice.
I
And so
was.
when you got out of law school, your first job, tell us about kind of your first job and where you are today, and how that came about.
Yeah, I got a couple interesting stories to tell. Yeah, so basically what happens, it was March of 1989, and I answered an ad to a guy that was looking for a law clerk, and that is actually my partner today. And so in 1989, I started working for him as a law clerk, running around downtown, filing things, learning how to draft documents, things like that. And so I got sworn in November 8th, 1990 as an attorney. A little bit less than 2 years went by. And then, um, so during that time period, I was working for the guy that I'm partners with now, George Bellis. And so there was a moment where he came to my office. This is like probably 1992. And he said, hey, notice that you're not really working on my stuff. And I said something like, yeah, well, I've been getting this business in, and I've been working on it, and I just don't have time to work on your stuff. And so he looks at me and he says, oh, that's okay. It's not a problem. I'll get someone else to work on it. You're going to have to start paying rent. And so that was lesson number one. And
Yeah.
well, I don't remember losing sleep, but I remember at that point that I realized, I'm going to have to start paying. So this is no longer for fun. And what I mean by that is, you have to remember, this is 1992 roughly. At that point, I'm probably charging people $150 for this, a couple $100 for that. Small. small amounts.
But it felt
And
like a
I
lot of
was,
money compared to like the hourly you're getting paid or whatever, right? Until
well,
you had
yeah, it
overhead
was
creep in, right?
correct,
Yeah.
correct. So it was more, it was probably more than I was getting paid at the time. But at that time, I was still, fighting with a sword for justice. And, and money really wasn't mattering because I was getting to keep everything I was making. And at this point, it's lesson number one. Okay. You're going to have an overhead now. And I just remember like, whoa, okay. So that was one story I want to share. That was up front in the beginning. And you know what? What happens is it's a small step and you adjust and you keep putting one foot in front of the next and you just keep walking and you just, eventually you're paying that and you get used to it and you figure out a way to make more money. And then, your overhead just becomes part of the story. Um, another funny thing that I want to say, it was a little bit later. Okay. It was actually a few years because I remember we were already in a new location. And I remember that we were representing, so I get a phone call, it's this family that I've known for many, many years. And they got in some trouble. And it involved a property that they purchased. But what they did was they put it in some other guy's name because he bamboozled them and said, hey, originally, anyway. So it's getting foreclosed and the bank is coming after them for a very large, what's called deficiency judgment. And they're like, hey, look, we got it. The property, was in our names, but we transferred it over to this guy and he promised and blah, 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 blah. So, they sit down in our conference room and this is a great money story. And until that point, I am having a hard time, asking people for money. Right. And I'm not valuing myself to the degree that I should or my services and, working on small things. And so now what happens is, we bring the two brothers in that were running this business. They had a successful insurance business. They sat down, in our conference room and, we start talking about the problem and I'm with George, right? And he's in the room and he looks at them and he says, okay, well, guys, this is a big problem. And, in order for us to work on this, we're going to need a retainer. And the retainer is $5,000. I'm telling you, I remember this like it was yesterday. I sat there and in my mind, I started hyperventilating. And I'm like, oh my God, my God, oh my God, what did he just ask them for? He just asked them for $5,000. In my mind, I just couldn't believe it. And at this point, the one brother is standing up. Okay. And the other brother looks at the other brother who's standing and he says, cut him a check. Couldn't believe it. And the other brother looks at me and says, well, from which account? Okay. So $5,000 was not an issue for them. They were figuring out which of the accounts to cut it from. But for me, it was like, whoa. So that was another big lesson, right? Is money and valuing my services.
And I think that's an important lesson for a lot of business owners, especially what I found in my experience is it's harder hurdle to get over for things that come simply to me, but are of value to other people. And I always often tell people that we have a tendency to lead from an egocentric position, meaning that we are going to, think that other people think just like we do. And so they're not going to value what we're doing because obviously they know how to do it. And when I realized they don't, the value of the outcome is what's most important. So thinking about you as an attorney, the fees that you get. And that's what I love about your story when you kind of started niching down into personal injury, that rather than having to come and ask for an upfront retainer, your structure is different. And a lot of people don't realize this, but talk a little bit about how a personal injury attorney like you, an expert, makes money, right? Because it's not the typical, I charge you a $5,000, $50,000 retainer up front, right? You
hmm
basically get to share an outcome. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to make clear is that I did heal my relationship with money, in the sense that I got comfortable, asking for retainers and asking for a fee. Um, It's funny that I did wind up, like you just said, working on what's called contingent fee cases. And the way that that works is that we take a percentage. So, in Illinois, the majority of cases, well, it's not something that's statutory. It's contractual. So you can charge whatever you want, honestly, but the, the going rate is a third. It can go up to 40%. There are some attorneys here and there that'll lower the fee to 25% on a personal injury case. There are some limitations on like medical malpractice cases. That can't go past a third. And if you're representing minors, statutorily that could be limited as well, sometimes at 25%. Workers' comp cases are 20%. And so it makes it easier for me because I produce. So there's a pool of money that's produced, and the majority of it goes to the client. I get to keep a piece of it, a part of it. And it's perhaps I'm more comfortable with that as well, but it's also easier. I don't have to bill and things like that. I was never really fond of billable time. And the unfortunate thing that I've noticed with litigation these days is that your average person really can't afford it. It's very expensive, and lawyers, when they're on an hourly rate or an hourly fee, they really are not. Depends on the lawyer, of course, right? But the result is secondary almost. It's almost as if like, okay, we're going to put these hours in, we're going to work, and eventually we're going to get to the end. And when we get to the end, let's hope we get a good result. And so they really don't lose. They're not invested. They're not invested at all in the case. As a matter of fact, they're not investing any money either. That's being fronted by the client, and the client gets a bill every month, and the lawyer is always whole at the end. The client sometimes wins and sometimes loses, right? And so in our situation, I'm not saying that we always win, right? But um, if we don't win, then not only have I lost all the time that I've put in and all the people and all the resources, but also the investment into the case that's gone as well. And so, yeah, you perhaps choose and pick your cases, and you don't want a lemon, so to speak. You don't want a frivolous lawsuit because those don't go very far. They got short legs. It kind of crawls just a little bit and then it dies. So, anyway.
Well, one thing I want to go back to, I mean, on the contingency, you have to upfront all the expenses, the expert fees, everything like that. And only if you win or recover fees do you even get to recoup that investment on your part. So it is risky. And so you have to really know the type of cases you're getting. But I want to go back because I think some of our listeners may be at a place where they're stuck on the money relationship thing, charging what you're worth and everything like that. What were some
Mhm.
ways that you changed the way you thought about that or grew up to think better about money and your worth and value? What advice would you give someone who's struggling in that place of really figuring out and charging what they're worth?
Yeah. So, like I said, that lesson, when the one brother looked at the other brother and said, cut him a check, and the other standing brother looked at sitting brother and said, from what account? It was really eye opening. And I realized, these were successful business people. They really were, had a very successful insurance practice. Later I learned probably making seven figures, and we're talking 30 years ago. So it wasn't a big deal. You know, I think probably I remember really just listening to all sorts of motivational tapes and reading about money and, the millionaire next door, whatever something about Babylon with
Yeah.
Napoleon Hill
Richest
and
guy in Babylon. Yeah.
yeah, richest man in Babylon, all these different things. And that's one of the things that you realize. And, and you also, it goes back to lesson number one, or like that first example I gave. You got overhead, baby. You got to pay it. So, you're the last one to eat. And so, got to pay this guy, that girl, this person, rents, the landlord, and let's hope there's some crumbs that you can scoop off the table to eat. At the very end. And anybody who's in business for themselves knows that. It's just the nature of the beast. So you want to produce a big enough piece of pie so everybody's taking pieces at the end that you get to sit down and enjoy that last piece.
And one of the big ahas for me was really in service business of any kind, we are paid and retained for outcomes. right? And
Hmm.
so, really, what we have to be confident in is, are we able to deliver the outcomes in the way that the client is expecting, right? And then manage those expectations along the way. If I have an author and they think that they can sell millions and millions of copies of their book, yet they don't have a Facebook account or any sort of platform or audience, I have to manage their expectations. It would be unethical for me to say, like, yeah, you're absolutely going to do that. Rather say, like, look, the average person who writes and publishes a book takes maybe 2,000 copies in the lifetime of the book sales, right? Unless there's some significant marketing push behind it, which is quite expensive on the upfront to get that momentum going. And for you as an attorney, I'm sure you have to set expectations, whether they're paying your retainer up front or you're working on a contingency, and really manage those expectations. So over the years, I'm sure you've had to manage a lot of expectations, whether it was a civil case or criminal or med mal or whatever. What are some tips you'd give someone, regardless of their service business they're in helping to manage expectations on outcome? Because really, most service businesses, whether you're lifting concrete, right, building a pool, building a home, adding a new roof, an accountant, a plumber, like your services are meant to produce an outcome. So how do you learn to manage expectations for people along the way?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to properly answer your question, but what I can say is you really want to deliver on what you say you're going to do, obviously, right? And so, like with you, okay, the different services that you provide.
Mhm.
I know you're in Texas, and if you had just the big hat with no cattle, that wouldn't be good, right?
Right.
So you got to have the cattle
That's
to
right.
go along with it. And so, if you take something on, you want to have the wherewithal to get it done. You want to make sure that you have steps in place to get it done. It can't just fall between the cracks and you forget about it and you get a phone call 3 months later. Hey, are you going to work on that project? Oh, I forgot about it. And it just doesn't work that way. So yeah, a system, I think that what happens is with time, entrepreneurs, you know, um, they're I forget what Dan Sullivan refers to them as, but the individualists, rugged individualists, right? And so you're doing everything yourself. You're solving every problem, which is great in the beginning because you got to learn how to do everything because then you can delegate things that you're not good at and don't want to do. So in the beginning, so you build a team. So you manage expectations by having that front stage of dealing with the clients and what they see and how they're dealt with. And then the backstage gets things done and you're delivering. You're responsible to deliver results because that's what people pay for. And if you meet expectations, that's great. If you fall below expectations, you're gone, and you're going to get probably 10 bad reviews or 10. They're going to tell 10 different people how bad you are. And if you do a great job, and maybe if you exceed expectations, or you put a big smile on their face, and you sit down with them and they get a check and they're like, "Whoa!" Like I had a guy yesterday and he listened to us on a case where um, we had suggested to him that he really should make a claim against his own insurance for what's called underinsurance. And so, if I'm going to use examples in this particular case, he's injured, um, and we get $100,000 offer from Geico Insurance. That's the tortfeasor. In Illinois, you sue the other guy. And so they forked over 100,000, and we said, your case is worth more. I think you should allow us, please, to make a claim against your insurance because your policy exceeds that policy. He had an insurance policy. This is a car accident we're talking about. He had a policy of 250,000. And so yesterday I sat down with him and I showed him because he previously allowed us to make that claim. Well, his insurance company forked over $150,000. So we sat down yesterday and I said, remember when we asked you and you really were reluctant to listen to us? Well, not only did we get 100 from the other tortfeasor from Geico, but we got 150,000 from your insurance. And I just remember this older man. I think he's 67 or 68, older than me. Okay, not old, but I got to be careful because I'm in my 60s now. Uh, yeah, but I could tell by the way he was looking at what's called a settlement statement and what his bottom line was, and he just couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe how much money he was going to be getting, and it would be it would have been a fraction, a much smaller amount because almost that entire 150,000 got added to his bottom line minus our fee. So minus our fee. So another 100,000 got added on to what he was going to get. He was just floored. So it's going to make a difference for him.
And what I found, Peter, is the first question I ask when someone comes to me for help is, can I help them? Right? Or really, do they need help? Right? So for you as a lawyer, you have to like, do they really need help, or is this a cut and dry
Mm-hmm.
type thing that they can handle? So do they need help? The answer is yes. Can I offer the help that they need or get them the help
Mm-hmm.
that they need? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And am I willing to help them with,
Mm-hmm.
to the standards of which we expect? Right. And so I think really thinking through how to assess that is, I mean, no offense, but you're not known to take on dog cases that can't be won. I mean, maybe if a family member came to you and needed help or something, you might try to do what you can. But I think
Mm-hmm.
part of success in service business is trying to position yourself to help in the best way you can, knowing who you could help the best. That awareness of who do we help the best and how can we help them, get the result they're looking for, and assessing that. Another thing I thought was interesting that you mentioned a little while ago is that you all absorb a lot of the risk in trying these cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you take on the financial responsibility and everything else. And I don't think people realize that about attorneys, of the cost and the overhead and everything else. I was talking to a client of ours, as you know, we do AI work. And,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, well, there's really no overhead for you with AI. I said, do you understand that my AI token burn is between 1,200 to 2,000 a month
Mm-hmm.
just for our stuff that we're doing, like building
Mm-hmm.
and working on, plus the courses and all the learning platforms, and then the people we work with.
Of
That
course.
it's but people, they just think you're sitting around, you read one file, you say like, oh yeah, we can help, bada bing, bada boom. Here's a $250,000 settlement. I work maybe 15 minutes, I make this. And they're also not
Mm-hmm.
taking into consideration that you've been practicing law, over 30 years now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've seen a few things, right?
Yeah, you just reminded me of the story, and I actually told this recently here to someone at the office. Um, it's the story about you could manipulate the story in a bunch of different ways, but basically what happens is there's a guy, he's got a huge multiple unit building. Let's just say it's 100 units, and it's a monster building, and he's got this huge boiler that heats the whole place, and it's the middle of Chicago winter, and we get this blizzard and this snow, this cold snap, and the boiler goes down. And so he calls up the first guy, and the guy says, "Look, I'm going to come over there, but I'm going to charge you $500, just to take a look at it, and I'll see if I can fix it." He comes in, charges the $500, says, "I'm sorry, but I can't fix it." Well, the guy's out $500, and time is ticking. He calls the next guy, and the next guy says, "Look, I'll tell you what. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to come over there, and I'm going to fix that thing for you. And if I can fix it, I'm going to charge you $5,000." And the guy says, "Yeah, okay, that's a lot of money, but he's a little desperate because he knows in a few more hours the pipes are going to start cracking, and the place is going to get flooded." So he says, "Okay, I'll pay you the $5,000." Guy comes in, and he comes in of all the HVAC guys, boiler guys. He comes in with a stethoscope, and he starts listening to the pipe. He's walking around. He finds a spot, grabs this big old mallet. He starts hitting this thing like 3, 4, 5 times. Bam, 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 bam. Boom, 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 boom. And the thing starts up, fixes it. It's like, "Okay, I fixed it. You owe me $5,000. It's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, $5,000. You were here for 5 minutes. I need you to give me a detailed bill." So, "Okay, you want a detailed bill? No problem." So he writes on the sheet of paper. He says, "Hitting pipe with mallet 5 times, $250. Knowing where to hit it,
That's
$4,750."
100%, right? That's the thing,
So, so it's like, it's like, the good thing is I, with my little stethoscope, I know where to hit now, and how to hit, and what to say, and what to do, and how to, so just like with what you're doing with the AI stuff, and the way you're helping us in our firm, so yeah.
Well, it's funny because I call my dad sometimes if like a litigation question comes up, or, if someone's, being pushy about something. And I usually get like a one-word answer from him. Like I sent him something that someone sent me a little while ago, and he said ChatGPT 1, ChatGPT 2. He's like, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. I was like, okay, I'll send you the 500 or whatever his hourly rate is. I was like, okay, because he
Right.
can read it, but he's got
Sure.
50 years in practice,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so he can quickly analyze. And my dad's, he's 75, but like with tech. So
Mhm.
like, I
Mhm.
remember talking to him the other day. He was on a legal platform, and he's like, yeah, they just released this beta for AI. I did 4 briefs in like, 20 minutes. And I was like, well, how do you know it's right? He's like, cause I'm an expert. And he's like, yeah,
Mhm.
it took 4 minutes to produce it. Took me an hour to review it, and it's ready to go. And
Mhm.
what's interesting, I was talking to another litigator, and he said, with the advent of AI, we're considering going more to a fee base rather than hourly base, because if we're able to do it much faster, right, the
Mhm.
billable becomes off, but the value is still there of what we're able to provide. And so I do think that as AI rolls out and businesses change, and like you said, you've been practicing law for 30 years. And what makes you an expert is not that you know how the right button to push in the moment, it's the years of experience with
Mhm.
law. And so narrowing down, we'll wrap up here. What led you on the path? Because I was interviewing someone recently for the podcast, and they said, in the niches are the riches, right? And everyone likes to call it niche, but that it doesn't work for the rhyme. So the niche is the rich, and obviously you've been successful in a broad scope of legal practice. For the last several years, you've really been narrowing down on personal injury, doing workers' comp and things like that. But you're focusing more and more on personal injury.
Mhm.
That wasn't just about money. Like, what clicked for you of realizing, okay, I'm going to narrow my focus a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more into an area of specialty? Because that's a risk in and of itself, right? When you're going down that pipeline, because personal injury cases aren't quick solves, right? That
No.
that takes a while for them.
Mhm.
On average, litigation's what, a year, 18 months,
Oh,
for if not more,
usually,
right?
yeah, even more. Yeah, I'd say up to 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So what led you on that journey of narrowing down your focus?
it just it called to me. I think I'm for me, I'm able to help people the most there. Um, you know, it turns out that I'm not at odds with my client, and I'll tell you what I mean by that, because I kind of touched on it a little while ago.
Hmm.
Really, nowadays, it's just so expensive to litigate cases. I think it's more so now than it used to be. And what'll happen is a client will come to you, and if they're not GE or Ford Motor Company, then they really can't afford the war. What they can do is they can afford a battle, and maybe even the second and third battle, but you might have 12 battles that you have to go through, and you're going to win most and lose a couple here and there. But at the end, those battles comprise the war. And so I just found myself at odds with clients where they committed to it and were going through it. And even though my bills were always low, they really, I was at odds because they couldn't handle it to the end. And so sometimes I would take them to the end, and I was doing pro bono, and at the end I wasn't getting paid. And that causes for your business, that causes a bad taste for everyone, right? Because now you're shortchanging your staff. You're telling them you can't give them raises. You can't pay them, what the successful law firms are paying. And so you lose them, and there's turnover, and you scratch your head, and you realize eventually the lesson comes through. Hey, you gotta respect yourself. And by doing that, you're creating a better environment for everybody. And so, I'm not sure if that holds true for everyone, but but let's put it this way. It has to, because every business, if it's in the red, if it's spending more than it's bringing in, is not going to survive. And so, if you're going to survive, you might as well do it well, and do a good job at it where everyone's happy. You're happy, your staff's happy, and your clients are happy. And so, um, it called to me. But when I reflect upon it during this conversation, probably had something to do with the money thing, in the sense that, you know, I don't want to have to ask for money. I'd rather give than take, um, unless I'm taking from the bad guys. So the people that are paying, which, I mean, that's really always insurance companies. So yeah,
Well, Peter, I appreciate you joining me today. I'm sure you'll be back on again. There's a lot more we can discuss. We have a lot of fun together. So thanks so much for taking the time to join me today on the podcast.
good to see you. Thank you so much.